Recently, longtime viewer of the channel, Jambo, has been talking about getting into like the lore and doing like lore master and stuff like that, especially in this time when we're waiting for the season to begin. And I think it's a really good idea, especially if you've never really played the game from like the early days. He was surprised, like he had played the game, but he never really got into the stories or the zones and the questing in those zones. And he's having a lot of fun doing it. And, it really is almost like a blast from the past going back to some of these zones, seeing some of the stuff that used to be in the game. And especially since a lot of it has been removed after the Cataclysm, it is really near and dear to my heart. So, I figured I would make a little tier list type video, a little funny video here where we take a look at my top however many zones. And I'm going to give you my perspective on them from the perspective of somebody who is about like ambience and theme more than like actual lore. So he's like interested in a few things, but he was saying like me and Cop should do a series where we talk about like lore and questing and stuff like that. And it's like I don't really like the lore part of it is not interesting to me. For me, it's the music, it's the kind of the colors, like it's almost like the full sensory load that you get when you do a zone is what makes me think about them for years to come. And I would say that, that is what my, like when I go and quest and level and play at that level, that is what I'm after. It's that feeling there. So I think this is a tier list of every single zone. We are not going to rank every single zone. But I will say, like, I could make a video on every single zone. I have really strong opinions about a lot of these zones. And everything that you see down here are ones that have not made the cut. So I believe this is like top 26 of my favorite zones. And I'm going to rank them 1 through 26 and elaborate on why. So I have them all listed here. These are my top however many zones. Like I said, there's definitely some more that could be added, but had to draw the line. I think we got 26 just because of a weird little thing here. But anyway, let's go ahead and rank them in order. So yeah, we'll just, I guess, what's there, 6 tiers here? So I'm going to be using the awful tier list. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and say last overall is actually going to be Howling Fjord. So this is definitely my least favorite of the favorites, but it is one of my favorites. I like the atmosphere a lot. The way I would say it is I really like the atmosphere, but I hate the questing. Like the quests in Howling Fjord are garbage, and I've never actually done them as Alliance. I had wanted to do it at one point, but I just really don't like Wrath of the Lich King. It's easily my least favorite expansion setting. Like Cataclysm is probably my least favorite expansion, but it's set in Azeroth, so it has some redeemable qualities. But Northrend is just not for me. Despite there being 2 Northrend zones on the list, it's just not the setting I like the most. But if there was one setting, it's this, and then into Grizzly Hills. Like this right side of the map, I do have some affinity towards. So Howling Fjord is also a little nostalgic for me because it's kind of the first zone of me taking the game serious. I started the guild in TBC, so I wanted to really start taking the game serious when Wrath was coming out. It was like the pre-patch for Wrath that we started the guild, and Howling Fjord was the first zone I leveled in as a serious player, quote unquote. So, yeah, a little nostalgia there, but yeah, the questing there is awful. And just, I tried to go on the Wrath beta, and it was like, oh my, I forgot how bad this zone actually is, especially in actual Wrath. So, that's definitely going to be, that's a good zone, but definitely not one of the best zones in the game, but still above zones like that aren't on the list currently. So the next one is kind of a difficult choice. Like that one, I feel like maybe we should just, let's just put that one on its own tier because I do really like the atmosphere, but there's nothing else really that I do like. So we might, let's see, next up, maybe go with, it's always a tough decision, man. See, I really like almost all of these zones at this point. Let's go ahead and say, ooh, this is tough, man. How about Western Plaguelands? We're going to go Western Plaguelands next. I will tell you now that we're talking about zones that are in both Classic and Live WoW, I will say I'm going to try to combine the memories of both zones into one discussion. Western Plaguelands in Classic is, it's not the best zone, honestly, but it is very good questing, very interesting questing. There's some interesting storylines there that are kind of hidden. And the whole Chromie stuff that happens in Western Plaguelands is really cool in Dreams, even though it takes place in both Western and Eastern Plaguelands. Probably my favorite quest line in the entire game, especially like any max level quest line. That's Classic only. The modern version of Western Plaguelands is quite nice. I have a whole video on that if you haven't seen it on the channel. It's very ambient. They do a good job kind of making it feel like they're restoring the zone. And both together kind of really give me some nostalgia for Warcraft 3. That is why Western Plaguelands is on the list. Because Warcraft 3, it's basically where Warcraft 3's human campaign takes place, the Western Plaguelands, and then eventually the Eastern Plaguelands is where the Undead campaign takes place. So, yeah, it's really, really cool. I like that whole. This is what makes WoW WoW to me, like this really important location list in this universe. And Western Plaguelands has all of it. And if you are extremely keen viewers of the channel from years ago, you would see that one day on a pre-patch launch night, I was trying to stream and there was no stream and there was no content to stream because the servers were down. So I actually did a Warcraft 3 map where I used both Eastern and Western Plaguelands together and made a restored Lordaeron with like human towns and everything. I had been working on that for a while, but I never actually got to play test it. So big fan of Lordaeron. Let's put it that way. So Western Plaguelands, I was going to get my vote. I hope that someday they will do another restoration, like another Cataclysm type thing, a revamp of the old world, and we will see a completely restored Western Plaguelands. Because what is there now is actually quite pretty, and there's the whole Uther's tomb and everything. So very, very nice. Okay, so next up, let's say I gotta say Loch Modan next, honestly. Loch Modan is a zone that's just a lot of nostalgia to me. It's not really that great of a zone. It's really not. The classic version is not either. Like both the Cataclysm and the classic version are very missable. The version that we have in Cataclysm is, I would say it's worse, but it's got better questing. It's got a better flow to it. It's got those like 5 collect quests that you just kind of get done and then you bring them all back at the same time. I love questing like that, where you can just turn in 5 quests all to one guy at the end. But the zone itself was the lock. Like that's why it's called Loch Modan. So yet another piece of evidence that Cataclysm just really. I mean, I get why they did a lot of this stuff. It makes complete sense, but just not aesthetically pleasing at this point. But I do like that you can see the Bastion of Twilight or whatever it's called, the big raid. You can actually see that from Loch Modan, and it really feels like you're almost connected to this Twilight influence. I've always liked the ogre situation. There's some things that are nice about Loch Modan. I like that it's kind of the first real zone for dwarves, so that's the thing for nostalgia purposes. I started a dwarf. That was my first main, and leaving one of my favorite elements ever, the snow element, and going into Loch Modan, it was quite jarring. And I learned a lot about the game in that zone. So it's kind of the place that I fell in love. I felt like in security with WoW. You know what I mean? Like before that, I was just kind of on the honeymoon phase, but then Loch Modan solidified it for me. So even though I don't really like the modern version of it, really I don't like either version of it that much. It's still got a place on the list just because of nostalgia. After that, we'll have to say, let's go ahead and say, this is tough. I'm going to go ahead and say Veil of Eternal Blossoms. Now, Veil of Eternal Blossoms, if we were taking out any type of questing or like actual content, this would probably be in my top 5. The thing about Veil of Eternal Blossoms, though, is it is an absolutely gorgeous zone when it's not the bullshit that you see on that little thumbnail from that image. And I'm going to tell you a quick little story. And I have a video on Ace Games TV. That's the channel I've been uploading the golf content to, but it used to be a WoW channel from back in the day. I have a video on that channel of them destroying that zone and what it looked like previously and what it looked like afterwards. So if you're not aware, in MoP, this was like the hub zone. This was like the main zone. This is where the cities were. This is where all the max level content took place effectively. And then the storyline basically destroys the zone. It's like a legendary zone for the Pandaren. Like you can't just go there. There was like a quest line to even enter it. Like there was no flying at the time, so you had to do this quest line to enter it. It's a really, 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 really cool idea. They haven't really done anything like that ever again, or even before that. This is the first time they ever locked out a zone like this. And it was really important to the lore. So they not only did that, but then they like take the lore so far that they destroy the zone. But then in Battle for Azeroth, they restore the zone because of the invasions, right? So there's like a heavy, heavy, heavy lore influence, like long-reaching lore here. But this is not a zone you can go and quest in. So like the version that we have in BFA is like the pristine, completely restored version again. It's not quite what it used to be, but it is very, very nice. But I'm telling you, if they ever did like a Chromie time where they reintroduced content that was removed, Veil of Eternal Blossoms would be up there with any classic zone that was removed in Cataclysm, because Veil of the Eternal Blossoms had a ton of content in it that is now all gone. All the max level content from that zone in MOP has been removed. The only stuff that's still there are the dailies that are related to achievements, because they were like, well, we can't get rid of the achievements. Yeah. So anyway, those are still there, and those are actually really good for questing. If you want to just level a character super passively, just go to Veil of Eternal Blossoms with Chromie time on, log on every day, every 24 hours. It's every 24 hours, not every actual reset, and do the 6 or so dailies that are there. They're non-combat related. You shoot a cannon, you run around, like it's just a bunch of non-combat stuff, and it's like 20, not even, it's like 10 minutes of gameplay a day, and you do 6 quests a day and you log back off. And they're all for achievements. So if you don't have the achievements, you can get them. But that is the only actual content in the zone. Then otherwise, they added like some grindy rep nonsense that nobody cared about ever, even back when it was there. And that's what the rest of the zone is. So pretty sad. But if they ever do again a Cataclysm restoration of zones, it's already done. They did it in BFA, which is actually crazy to me. So yeah, that's like, I love whenever the BFA invasion thing or whatever it's called, when that's not the Nazoth one and it's just like a normal color pattern, and like there's just like the Mantid or the Mogu or whatever. I love going there. I just love setting my hearth there sometimes and just hanging out there. It's a really, 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 really nice zone, but there's never really been any content in it ever since they removed it. So okay, next up, I'm going to go ahead and say Shadow Moon Valley. This is a zone that I only recently fell in love with, and by recently I mean like 4 years ago. But like compared to some of these other zones, it's recent. Me and Cop did a playthrough of this, and we did a video on that as well. And I have to say it was really fun. But it's a very like colorful and pleasant zone to be in. I do not like the questing. I really don't like it at all. I haven't quested there since, and I'm not sure I would again. But apparently it's a very efficient zone too, to quest in, which is something to consider. But you know, it's a story about Ner'zhul, right? It's a bunch of stuff with Ner'zhul and the orcs there. This is the WoD version, in case you can't tell. So yeah, this is a good zone, and it's one of the entry level zones for Alliance. And the reason I say I only recently fell in love with it was because up until recently I had never played Alliance. And when I switched to Alliance, I was like, oh, this is the zone that I never got to do. Like, there's a few zones that are Alliance only, but not many. You know what I mean? And that's one. That's one of the zones that's Alliance only. So I had never played. I'd played multiple leveled characters through WoD, never touched Shadow Moon Valley. You know what I mean? The only time you'd enter it is to go do the dungeon in there, right? So yeah, it's very interesting zone, and I love the color scheme, and it's also really important. Like, that's where Black Temple is. You know what I mean? So I do think they underdelivered on that portion of the storyline, but you know, it is there. So it's pretty cool. And I would say that it's definitely, if you've never played Alliance before in your life, like if you were like me, you should definitely consider doing that zone. Okay, so next up, let's see. I think I'm going to go ahead and say Ashenvale. As much as I hate to rank it this low, I pretty much have to. And that is because, again, I'm trying to be a cumulative thought process of both the original version and the new version. The new version is awful. I really don't like that zone at all as Alliance. And that's sad because the original version as Alliance is probably one of the best zones in the game. In Classic, I think it is probably the best. Like, if you're especially interested in Kalimdor, like if you want to get that Night Elf feel, that's the zone. Like, that is the zone, and it's a very, very famous zone from Warcraft 3. That's where the Night Elf campaign takes place, that the orcs come over to Ashenvale, and that's where part of their campaign takes place. And that's where basically, you know, you go into Hyjal. That's like where the game ends. It's Ashenvale into Hyjal and all that. So they do an absolutely amazing job in Classic recapturing that. There are some of the best quest lines in the entire game in Ashenvale, in my opinion. I love the Paladin quest lines, as they're human paladins coming over to Ashenvale to try to teach the newly formed Alliance's member the night elves about what the humans are interested in, right? Humans are very like self-important in classic WoW, and they're always like, well, here, this is what you need to care about. So they send paladins over there to explain the light to the night elves, you know what I mean? And along the way, you do a bunch of quests with them, and it's really, really cool. I also love the Scythe of Elune quests. Easily my favorite quest line in the leveling portion of the game. It's up there with In Dreams. Those two are always going to be neck and neck for me. And I love the fact that the Scythe of Elune ultimately becomes the Balanced Druid artifact in Legion, which is crazy to me. It starts in Classic and ends up becoming the artifact in Legion. So easily one of my favorite zones. The ambience is good, but the skybox is awful. I'm just going to warn you that now. I'm a big skybox fan. I'm a big visual fan of the zone. The trees are cool and everything, but my God, is that just an awful skybox. And it's really strange because you would think it would have a more like darker skybox or a more ambient. It's kind of just like a purple. It's like somebody just threw some purple paint into the thing and spread it all around. That's pretty much it, day or night. It doesn't change. Not great in my opinion. But the music, and if you turn like the ambient sounds up, you'll hear the birds and all that stuff a lot. But in terms of questing, the version that we have in Cataclysm is horrible. I think it's one of the worst. Like it probably is like top 5 worst zones coming out of Cataclysm, like changed from Classic to Cataclysm. And that's because they turn it into this like proper war. Like now Horde have basically like won, like they've taken over the zone. On Horde, it's actually pretty good to be. I'm gonna tell you straight up, I like it as Horde. But as Alliance, it's like sad. It's kind of sad to even go in there. And also, it's very difficult for some reason. If you're doing a leveling challenge, stay away from Ashenvale. It's way, way harder than any other zone in that early bracket. Like you might go from the Northern Barrens to Ashenvale. Ashenvale is 5 times harder than the Northern Barrens, and that always ends up killing my leveling challenges because I want to get a little bit more experience before I go down to Southern Barrens and Stone Talon. So, anyway, Ashenvale, very lore driven, heavy zone, good ambience, but terrible questing in the modern game. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and say Oldham, and this is going to be the last one for the good tier. I really like Oldham. I like the concept of Oldham. I think the zone is, it's huge. It is huge. It's probably one of the biggest zones in the game in modern WoW, like certainly Cataclysm and onward. And I think the storylines here are incredibly important. Like it's all a big Titan zone, right? And I love the whole Titan concept. I love the idea of it. But you know what I'm telling you right now about? The thing that I like the most about? I love Egypt. Okay. If you followed some of the side discussions that come through this channel, Egyptologists, all this archaeology stuff that we've been talking about, especially in the Discord over the years, this is fascinating to me in real life. So being able to explore that in game is also fascinating. That kind of Nile area with the river and the lushness in the middle, with the inky black on, or with the sky stone or sky shard or whatever, the thing that turns it into midnight. Those are just, it's just like you can take screenshots there. You know what I mean? You'll feel it. It's such a great atmosphere in that zone. And the questing, I haven't done the questing in a very long time, but if I remember correctly, it's pretty good. Jambo just did it and he loved it. And so this was kind of what started this whole topic, because he was doing Oldham and he was loving it. But I will say, another brilliant restoration with the Battle for Azeroth end patch, because my God, was this a zone that was just so important. And especially with the whole Old God and Titan thing, it really shines again in the same way that we said Veil of Eternal Blossoms does. So as much as I love Veil and the restoration there was really good, the Oldham version, it's just a better zone altogether. It's so huge, and I think I would love to see somebody do Oldham from level, whatever the minimum level. I guess you have to be 30, right? I bet you can probably get a lot of levels in Oldham because it's a really, really big zone. So that is definitely, these are the zones that I'm like, I do like, okay? I don't love them, but I do like them, all right? Now we're on to the zones that I like, or now we're on to the zones that I love, okay? And the first one on that list is going to be Bastion, okay? Now, Shadowlands is on here. There is no Dragonflight zones, and I think that's fair because Dragonflight's so new that we probably shouldn't be ranking the zones. But Bastion is the starting experience for everybody in Shadowlands. And if it wasn't for Bastion, I really don't know what my thoughts would have been on Shadowlands coming into it, because when I got into the alpha, I got into the alpha day one as like a friend of a person who worked at Blizzard effectively. And it was such an important moment in my life. Like I felt like I had made a big step, you know what I mean? And so that alone, on top of the fact that this zone was gorgeous, is gotta propel it on the list. You know what I mean? The ambience of the zone is unmatched. There's nothing in the game even remotely similar. It's like this high Greek, almost like fantastical Greek feel to it. I love the Kyrian, to be honest. Like the whole Covenant system, a lot of people didn't like, but the actual atmosphere of the Covenants is ridiculously good. And Bastion is the best of the four, if you ask me, even though I didn't like what the Covenant offered Death Knight. I loved the actual Covenant. And the campaign that takes place in Bastion is definitely my favorite of the four, including Uther, of course. So the questing is actually the best. I think that is the best modern questing zone in the game outside of Azure Span. Like I said, we're going to try to not include Dragonflight discussion here. But like Shadowlands and Prior, this is the zone. If you had to do, if I could only level in one zone for the rest of my life, it would be Bastion. The questing there from the campaign, like when you start a Shadowlands character for the first time, you have to do the campaign. It's amazing. I do that all the time. What I always did in Shadowlands, I would level through the campaign, finish Bastion, and then turn on adventure mode, and then just go do Bastion again. Like that's how, and I did a Bastion only leveling challenge on the Rogue, the no spec Rogue that I had. It's my favorite Shadowlands zone. For questing, it's not even close. It's not like in terms of questing, there is no peer from really, I would say, all the way back to MOP. Everything between MOP and Shadowlands, this is the best zone. Okay, for questing, like prior post, like let's say WoD and onward. But the it's very one note. Okay, the thing that I dislike about it is there's really no the musical theme is very weak. It's very easy to just kind of tune it out. It doesn't feel like it has an impact on the zone, and you can tell it's this the first zone they worked on because it's got the least charm out of all the four. It's got the least like there's just not really much going on there. And again, I get the Kyrian Covenant is meant to be a big part of the zone, but it's so much of the zone. Like probably like 60% of the zone is max level Kyrian content. And it's like they took over all of it. Like the NPCs that are the bad guys in that campaign have just taken over half the zone. Like it's not, that's just not great in my eyes. So not a lot of great ambience, like past the initial visual splendor of it, and there's not a lot of replayability there. You just spend a couple levels there while leveling, and that's it. I'd love to go back there and level. I've not actually gone back to Shadowlands to level, so someday we will do that. Okay. All right, so next up is going to be, you know what? Let's go ahead and say this. Eversong Woods is next. I really like this zone. This is definitely this is in the love category. You know, Eversong Woods, I don't exactly know. They're counting the actual starting zone and then onward from like the whole Quel'Thalas area, right? They're not counting the dark and twisted version afterwards. Anyway, Eversong Woods, gorgeous theme, absolutely pure high elf vibes to it. If you ever have any interest in like high elven structures or anything like that, this is the place. It would easily be in the top 5 zones if it just didn't look like it was from 2007. That's the only thing that hurts it. But that's also a benefit in my eyes because it's one of the only zones that has 0 changes. Okay. Eversong Woods has not been changed whatsoever. Well, there's some like apparently because originally they changed the way Kael'thas's character was going to be perceived in the Burning Crusade. So in the first like patches of TBC, and there's actually some quests here that still indicate that he's a good guy. It's really strange, but anyway, I don't know that much about it because I didn't actually really play TBC. But Cop was telling me about it. But anyway, the zone is almost untouched to the point where you can get a ton of levels in it. Like you can get a ton of levels in it. Start a Blood Elf, you get probably 20 levels in that zone. Okay. and I love the feel. The music is pretty good. It's TBC music, you know what I mean? It's not anything special, but it is good, and I like the feel of it. So I do think that this is going to be a top few zones for me, but it's just so antiquated. But I could easily just set my hearth here. Like I could have a blood elf character just set their hearth here, and I would always be satisfied. But no flying here. Again, that helps it for me. Very ancient, and really could do with some updates. But yeah, I could redo. I did those. What I used to do is just party sync back into that zone with a fresh slate, and I would just redo those quests over and over again to level Blood Elves. I love that zone. Okay, next up is going to be, let's go ahead and say, yeah, you know what? Okay, Grizzly Hills. Grizzly Hills is going to be next up. I'm going to tell you right now, this zone is probably like top 5 in terms of atmosphere. If you've never been in it, you've never heard the music, you've never seen it at night, you're missing a big part of the game's like best features. If you've never entered Grizzly Hills at night with your music turned all the way up, in-game sounds all the way up, you are missing something that is truly magical in this game. Unfortunately, the questing is terrible. It's not quite as bad as Howling Fjord. It is definitely better, and especially if you like the lumberjack, kind of like the foresty theme that the zone has, you might enjoy it. For me, it's very repetitive and it kind of ends in a very poor way, but the zone's ambience carries it. Like, if we're measuring what the questing and some of the other modicums are compared to the ambience is like 9.5 of the rating. You know what I mean? Whereas it's only in this spot because of the ambience, and the music and the feel to the zone is just unparalleled. That's it. There's nothing really else to say. The rest of it is passable. There's even like random like max level world content. I never understood what that was. Just like a hub of some sort. That's I don't even know what that is. I still don't know what that is to this day. But it's a really, really, really unique, flavorful zone. And honestly, if you like Azure Span, you will love Grizzly Hills. It's basically the same feeling, the music, the theme. It's just not fully snowy and all that. So check it out, Grizzly Hills. Without question, one of the most unique zones in World of Warcraft. Next up, I am going to say High Mountain. So High Mountain slightly ahead of Grizzly Hills simply because it's got a similar great ambience to it. And I will tell you, it has the best night skybox in the entire game, which is big for me. Like, that's pretty much why it's where it's at. The questing there is fine. Legion questing, I don't love. Okay, I'm not gonna lie to you. Azuna's okay. And High Mountain's good. Like, it's fine, but I don't really like the other two zones that much. And if it wasn't for the Legion artifacts and Suramar, I would say Legion is probably the worst questing experience expansion ever. But High Mountain's questing is good, and its zone is spectacular. The best ambience in Legion, without question. Get yourself a shade scale. Come here at midnight. See that Aurora Borealis looking thing. I don't know what that's called. Have a look at it. If you haven't seen it, you should. It is unbelievable. Like the best skybox, without question, in the game at night. And that is enough for it to be in the top, whatever this is. You know what I mean? So the rest of the zones, whatever, man. I like it because it's got Ebonhorn or whatever. I do like the Torrent aesthetic. Like, it's a huge, it's almost like a Thunder Bluff type zone. Like, the zone is around a city, and the city is the hub, which is awesome. And, I don't really like the whole, like, the High Mountain Torrent are cool and all, but I definitely like the original Torrent better. But this is awesome. This is a good zone if you like Tauren stuff. Unfortunately, a big part of the zone is the stupid coastal area, which is just terrible questing. And a big chunk of the zone is the Hunter Order Hall, which you can't enter. But I bet if you play a High Mountain Hunter, maybe you feel like you're really at home in that zone. Definitely Shade Scale. Can't recommend it enough. Okay, so let's see. We're sticking with the great tier for a while still. So we're still in this mindset here where zones are very, very good. I love them, but I don't feel like I want to do them all day, every day. So that is going to be Zangor Marsh next, I think. What's going on? Zangor Marsh is definitely a strange addition to this tier list, okay? And I'm shocked that I even like it as much as I do. I'm going to tell you right now, Zangor Marsh is if you look back at the early days of WoW, you play classic and you realize zones have almost no quests in them. Like, until like Feralus, the quests that really aren't even segmented properly. Like you have to constantly leave the zones just to quest. TBC changed that. Now, if you ever did Hellfire Peninsula when Classic was just ending, like, TBC had just launched, you'll be amazed at the quest density, at the amount of time you could spend in one zone, at the amount of content in one zone. Then there's Zanger Marsh. Zanger Marsh is like a quarter of the quests of Hellfire Peninsula. So its questing is, it's not good, is what I'm saying. But it's, to be honest, dude, like out of TBC era, it's solid. Like Hellfire Peninsula's questing is really dense, but it is dull and boring and really back and forth and back and forth and back. You do the same quest objectives over and over again. Zanger Marsh is a very unique zone. It has one of the coolest areas in the entire expansion. That is the underwater raid thing, although you don't really enter it much, but you do care a lot about it. And I love the druid feel. It's such a good druid zone. It's so strange because this expansion doesn't feel like a druid expansion. I don't really understand the Cenarian Circle or whatever they're called in this expansion. I don't understand their involvement. Like, where did they come from? I don't know. Have they been there the whole time? TBC's lore makes no sense to me whatsoever. People tried to explain it to me when I talked about it in a leveling challenge one time. They said that all the characters that are there were actually here from Warcraft 2. And I don't know if that's true about the Cenarian Circle or whatever, but their involvement in the zone is why the zone is a zone. There's almost no other questing in the zone other than the stuff they offer. But the ambience of this zone, dude, I'm telling you, with the music on, these giant mushrooms, the water everywhere, and just this dull, it's like I've listened to these things on YouTube that are just like they're just like frequencies. They're meant to get your brain to stop like hyper focusing on different things. It kind of just get evened out, right? That's what's going. I can't remember what it's called. It's like drone, something drone, right? That's what's going on in Zanger Marsh. It's literally just this kind of just this sound that just permeates. Very little actual music. And to be honest, TBC is like this in every zone. There's no actual music. It's not like Classic or even Wrath, where there's like ups and downs and crescendos and beats and all this stuff. It's just like a sound that just plays, and it is perfect. It is so perfect for this zone. Okay. It's a short zone. You're not going to get a lot of experience in the zone if you level there today, but it's another one that really hasn't changed. TBC is almost exclusively not changed at all. So go out there, and if you've never played it, just try it out, man. Especially if you're, looking for something different, because this zone is so different than the rest of TBC. Honestly, feels like it could have been its own expansion. Like it's such a different vibe to it, and the whole water. So in Classic, if you got even your hooves even remotely wet on your horse, you would be dismounted. And I remember when I saw Zanger Marsh for the first time, I was like, I'm done. I'm quitting this game. I was like 16 or 17, And then I realized they fixed it. So now in TBC, you can actually ride your mount in the water. And I was like, this is the best zone ever now, because I love water. I love watery zones, like zones that have a lot of water in them. So okay. Onward to our next zone, which is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and, man, these are all so close now. At this point, it's really hard for me to pick one. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, Wandering Isle. I'm going to go ahead and say Wandering Isle here. I'm going to tell you right now, Wandering Isle is without question my favorite starting experience in anything post-classic, okay? I could do this over and over and over again, and the guy who leveled exclusively on the Wandering Isle, if you've never seen it, Double Agent, he never picks a faction because you have to pick a faction to leave the Wandering Isle. It's such a cool idea. If it didn't take 550,000 hours, I would totally consider doing it. Love the zone. Love the fact that it's a monk order hall in Legion. It's pretty much the reason I played a monk in Legion and Onward. Just going back to that order hall is amazing. And you can actually do some shenanigans to get on to the entire island, even nowadays. So I don't think it's the same version that you'll never see leveling players there, but the Wandering Isle is a gem. I love the Pandaren aesthetic. I love the feel of this kind of high Pandaren culture, but it's not like grandiose. It's not like a Veil of the Eternal Blossoms. It's more like kind of like a low fantasy feel. Like this is what you would live like if you lived on an island. You know what I mean? It's perfect. It's like perfect. It's exactly what the Pandaren aesthetic is. at that level, and it's a starting zone, you know what I mean? So it's really replayable. It's got a lot of fun little things, and me and Cop had an absolute blast here. It was actually the first video we made together on this type of thing, so it's always going to be a little nostalgic for that. Unfortunately, I hate the Pandaren. It's my least favorite race. If I can do it as any other race, well, I don't like Goblin either, but it's one of my least favorite races. If I could do this as like a human paladin on the Wandering Isle, I'd spend a lot of time there. Let's put it that way. So love the zone, just don't really like the fact that it's the Pandaren starting zone. Okay, so next up, this is the one I was debating. Next up is going to be Redridge, okay? Now, it's difficult to talk about why Redridge is this high on the list but not higher without me spoiling what's to come on this topic, okay? But I'm going to tell you right now, Redridge as a zone is not very good. The classic version is it's a good zone because it's an early zone and there's some interesting stuff going on there. But the questing there is bad, frankly. The new version I don't love, but it's way, way more cohesive questing. Okay. There's pretty much let's just say 2 or 3 things that Redridge gets this nod from. Okay. Number one, the night skybox. Oh my god. It is like the best night skybox in the classic like in the classic world. Okay. If you have never seen how dark the night is in Redridge, it is unbelievable. It's almost as dark as Inky Black Potion. And it is striking when you see that pitch black, that midnight blue over this town of Lakeshire that used to be a ganking haven, a terribly like it's just crazy. It's such an important location in WoW, and to see this kind of really visceral feel to that midnight theme, unbelievable. Okay, so that's on the list. Number 2, unique quests in Classic. Okay, probably the most unique Classic quest I have ever experienced in, especially in the early part of Classic. There's a quest here from a tower in Elwyn Forest. Okay, you have to go from Elwyn to Redridge. There's another tower. I don't know if it's a reference to the 2 towers, like the Lord of the Rings. I don't know what is going on, but there's basically like a necromancer there in Classic. Okay, it's a crazy cool quest. There's like it's that turned in really strange ways. They basically probably wanted to have the auto turn in feature that they have in Classic or in Cataclysm and Onward, but they didn't have it at the time. So you had to go turn it into the statue, which doesn't make any, like, I mean, the statue doesn't even talk. It's just makes no sense whatsoever. Very, very, very unique quest. One of the most unique quests ever. But then, even more interesting, they turned that guy into a black dragon. And then in the Cataclysm version, he's like the bad guy of the zone. And so the Cataclysm version's questing is also very unique because it has the Bravo Company. So in both versions, the like a main character of the zone is John J. Keeshan, okay, who's a Rambo reference, very obviously a Rambo reference, like just so obviously. And then he is like the main character of the modern version. But in Classic, he's kind of like this minor character who you end up helping, and he becomes an important character in the WoW universe. And I love that. That's one of my favorite things about any like content in WoW is when characters start small and become permanent. Okay. And so this guy is the epitome of why I love Classic humans, because the humans in Classic are like, it's real. You could feel it. It's got that feel of like almost like the way Rambo's characters portray. If you've never seen the film Rambo, it's a very, 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 very good film. Um, but like this whole like almost feeling like they're abandoned by the government. They're extremely skilled but no longer needed. It's got this weird feel to it where I can't describe it, but I love that character. I love the Onyxia questline, and that's what I'm trying not to spoil it. Redridge Mountains is so paramount to the Onyxia questline and the human storyline. And I will say, like, we talked about In Dreams and the most epic questline ever in World of Warcraft is the Onyxia questline because it starts in level 1, okay? And Redridge Mountain is a huge part of it. The third thing I love about the zone, the influence of the orcs. I love orc versus human. That is my favorite aesthetic, like my favorite combination of 2 forces in World of Warcraft, in Warcraft 3, in all versions of WoW. Unbelievably strong in this zone. Really, no other zone has anything even similar because the Horde and Alliance then are the playable characters, right? So they can't have them pit off against each other very heavily. This is not the Horde. This is the Dark Horde or whatever. This is the people who are in Blackrock Spire spilling over into the zone because it's very close. Another very unique thing about the zone is you can actually walk into what is basically a max level zone from a early level zone. Okay, I love that. Well, that was also something I want to bring up with Lochmodon. Lochmodon has that very unique gate that you can take to Searing Gorge. They used to require a key. It was very interesting back in Classic. But anyway, Redridge Mountains, not very good questing. Human only, Alliance only, both versions. So if you've never played Alliance, might want to check it out. But frankly, the both versions are terrible. The classic version is like you can literally just skip it. Like it has a lot of side quests and things that can get you experience, but especially in like a Season of Mastery setting, it's just not really needed. You can just go and do like those initial grinding quests and then leave. It's kind of strange, but the gambit of Elwyn to Westfall to Redridge to Duskwood is the best combination of zones in the game, and it's because of the Onyxia questline and that overall feel that the humans are in peril. Okay, so we'll do, let's see. So next up, we're going to go ahead and say Azure Mist Island. Okay. Azure Mist Island is definitely another outlier on this list. I only recently fell in love with it, and I will tell you the ambience here is top notch. Again, the music in the zone is absolutely foundational to my love of it. But I also love the zone's theme as well because it's basically a night elf zone. It is effectively a night elf, like a kind of a place where night elves used to live, and they crash on it. So that's amazing to me because I love the night elf aesthetic. It's a better aesthetic than the Ashenvale one, even a little bit more modern than the original Ashenvale, and it has amazing music, dude. Like the Azure Mist music is so freaking good, and it's the same reason. It's just like this kind of dulcet tone that just plays, and it's just you turn that up, and it's unbelievable. But the thing I'm gonna tell you right now, the reason I fell in love with Azure Mist Island was actually Legion. I had never done the zone. I think I did. I remember playing Draenei when TBC came out. I remember the Super Bowl. I left the Super Bowl's halftime to go play a Draenei, and that was the year that what was her name? Justin Timberlake and whoever the wardrobe malfunction. But anyway, um, yeah. So Azure Miss Island, I played a long time ago, but I hadn't touched it since. Come Legion, you go back there. Huge, extremely important part in Legion story, going back there. And then you go back there a second time, and at that point, you're flying. And at that point, it made me realize how gorgeous that zone actually was because it was nighttime at the time. Shade scale wasn't in the game yet, but it was nighttime at the time. The zone's night is not great, but it's pretty cool. And then you're flying in the zone because you're in this ship that's about to take off. And if I could have stayed in that phase for the rest of my life, I would have. When you look out at Azure Miss Island at night from above and you see all the tops of the trees and the towns and everything, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Such a striking moment that happened to me in Legion. But I'm going to tell you right now, the questing there is horrible. And I don't know if it's because it's really only meant for a few levels for early Draenei stuff, but it's a terrible, terrible zone. Way out of the way. Super far out of the way. Even as a night elf, it's really far out of the way. And unfortunately, Blood Mist Isle, which is definitely not on this list, is far, 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 far better questing. Super high experience per hour. I'm telling you, if you want to do a Draenei aesthetic, Azure Mist Island is so much better than Blood Mist Isle. It's kind of like Eversong Woods and whatever the other Ghostlands or whatever. Those two zones are so different from each other in many ways, but unlike Azure Mist Island, Eversong Woods actually has tons of quests, tons of stuff you can do. Azure Mist Island, very basic, very, very, not a lot of quests, honestly, and not a great questing experience. So that's what keeps it on this great tier. But yeah, frankly, it's got probably one of the highest ambiances in, especially the first 3 expansions. So if you've never quested there, you should definitely give it a try. And just make a Draenei. You don't even have to make a new character. So, all right. So are we at the point where I think we are? I think we're at the point now where everything else is going to be in the amazing tier. Looks like we probably got like 10. Yeah, top 10. We're in the top 10. This video is going to be long. Top 10 here. So Now is to the time where every decision is going to be very difficult. Okay. I think actually this one I'm going to say is probably not that difficult. I'm going to go ahead and say Stranglethorn. Now, I have just Northern Stranglethorn and also Northern Barrens here, but I'm going to count all Stranglethorns, even though they're separate zones now. Originally, they weren't. Stranglethorn is one of the most interesting zones ever in World of Warcraft. It's the first zone where Horde versus Alliance are present, making it an absolute battleground back in the day in pre-war mode, and still even in war mode. Apparently, it's still because it's still looked at as one of the most efficient questing experiences in the game. In fact, if you look at like speedrunners of the modern game, they include Stranglethorn, which is kind of crazy at times. So yeah, it's very interesting. The zone is got this huge feel to it where it's like a battle zone. But the stories are amazing here. I love troll aesthetic. As you know, Zul'Gurub, my favorite raid ever, is present in Northern Stranglethorn. I love the kill the trolls type stuff. All that troll aesthetic is amazing to me, and this is the best zone in the game for it, for sure. A modern version of it is still very good, and I still do Northern Stranglethorn on almost every character I level. One of my favorite zones in the modern game, top 5 in Cataclysm and post Cataclysm for sure. And it's just really nice. It's just like comfortable. Kill beasts, kill trolls, kind of the same aesthetic that you're used to. It's almost like it's not changed. It's probably one of the more similar zones too from the old days. But Cape of Stranglethorn, wildly different. I like it a lot less, even though I still do like it, just because I love Booty Bay. Booty Bay is probably my favorite city, like non-capital city, certainly in the early expansions. But the original version of Stranglethorn is unbelievably cool. It's like a zone that you can get like 20 levels from. Like you can come there at 30 and you'll still be there into the 40s. It's pretty wild because there's a lot of quests that come back through and a lot of quests that start and leave from Booty Bay. Booty Bay is basically a major city in Classic. Okay. So that is unmistakable. You'll never experience a zone quite like Stranglethorn again in Classic. They'll never do a zone like that where there's that level of actual depth to it. Like you're going to quest there for hours and hours and come back and return. And it's the port to the Barrens, right? The only way to get from Kalimdor to Eastern Kingdoms as a Horde character is through the Barrens. It's through Booty Bay, and it's that really makes me fall in love with it. Okay, so next up is everyone is tough at this point. I just really they're all tied, honestly. But you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and say Winter Spring. Winter Spring is really only on the. It's very easy for me to explain Winter Spring. I love a snow zone. I love a zone where snow is heavily present, where it's got this wintry feel. It's almost like an enchanted, magical winter feel, you know? And the blue dragons in the classic version carry this zone for me. Huge fan of blue dragons, in case you don't know that. I hate the fact that they're removed in the Cataclysm version. The Cataclysm version is still one of my favorite zones. Even without one of my favorite parts of the zone, it doesn't matter. It's still a snow zone. Turn on Inky Black, turn on Shade Scale, see this place at night. Gorgeous, absolutely beautiful version of World of Warcraft. Dark skybox, white ground. Never going to see it. So few zones have it. Make sure you check it out. But the questing here in Classic is very interesting. It's got a lot of endgame content to it, like things that you need for endgame content as well. There's this place down south, which is really, really unique. It's like basically the entrance to Hyjal, and there's a lot of high-level demons and all this stuff here, which is kind of crazy. But the blue dragons are huge in Classic. It's the only place that you can reliably get blue dragon scales as well. And as you know, I'm a huge blue dragon fan. But the Cataclysm version doesn't really feature that. There is still 2 Blue Dragon rares in the Cataclysm version, which if you heard me talk about this in Shadowlands, I was actually farming so I can get a transmog piece made. They still do skin and drop 1 Blue Dragon scale, which is crazy. But anyway, yeah, the zone has lost a lot of its charm, but it is still an amazing zone. And if you like if you're a Christmas fan at all, come out here, throw on Shade Scale, maybe Inky Black, just turn that sounds up to. I mean, the sounds in the zone are really wintry feel. And the questing is honestly not great. I mean, it's passable. It's good. Like it's average. There's also a reference to Bornak, who's one of my favorite Blizzard employees ever. So he's got his own NPC in the zone. So that's cool. But anyway, Next up, let's see. Oh man, this is also tough. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and say Elwyn Forest at this point. Elwyn Forest is a starting zone. Pretty high on the list to have starting zones, but you see there's still a few left. Elwyn Forest is really what we already talked about. Redridge is the reason Elwyn is here. It starts the Onyxia kind of the emotions that you understand that humans are in trouble. Things are not going well for humans in classic WoW, and it's really just so important to the actual lore of the game, the entire game, because humans really are the main characters, especially for the Alliance side. And that's just it's undeniable. It sets off the cascade of events that ultimately become a huge part of classic WoW, and they just did the human the heritage armor, and it's referencing all the stuff I'm talking about. So I mean, it's pretty much confirmed that WoW's main characters are humans, right? But I'll tell you the other cool thing about it in the modern version, it's really not changed. It's almost the exact same quest structure. You could follow the same path through Elwyn Forest and still find the same quests, the same difficulties, the same interests. So also, it's a really cool little area. That big lake in the middle of Elwyn Forest is always interesting. I think it was for like a paladin quest. Maybe it's for other quests as well. Some class quests that are no longer in the game. But I just love it. The zone is basically home to me. I would do Elwyn on every single character I could. And in Classic, the fact that it is the start of the craziest, like the most depth any quest line has, the Onyxia Attunement for Alliance pretty much starts in Elwyn at level 1. How cool is that? Okay, so yeah, now we're really getting into the difficult times here. You know what, dude? I'm gonna just go ahead and say Duskwood next. I really, 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 really like Duskwood. The questing is outstanding. Like, it's probably the best questing in both versions, Cataclysm and pre-Cataclysm, of any zone in the game. Okay. I'm gonna tell you right now, though, I really don't like the ambience of this zone. I'm not a Halloween guy. I'm not a spooky kind of guy. So for me to have this where it is, it tells you something. Like that is a big, big tell right there. For Duskwood to be in my top, what's this, 8 zones? Huge. But it's because of the questing, dude. The questing in Duskwood is freaking amazing. Okay. And if you've never seen it, I have a video on the channel. 3 of my favorite quest lines in the entire game from Classic are in Duskwood. If you've never played Duskwood in Classic, and the other cool thing about Duskwood in Classic, entirely contained. The quests are all start in Duskwood and they all end in Duskwood. Now, one of them is really cool in the fact that it sends you all over the world. The Morbid Fell quest line, I love. Probably my favorite leveling quest line in the game. But the actual zone itself, it's got like a horror feel to it, and it's really important for the actual lore. Now, it's not as quite heavily tied into the Onyxia thing, but you can tell that the fact that they're in this position and that Onyxia strangling the Nile or the human army is making Duskwood even more dire. So they've created their own militia who ends up getting corrupted by a dreadlord in Legion. Like this is just so it's such a good zone, dude. Such a good zone. Rip Althea Abendlock, by the way. Unbelievable characters, unbelievable zone. Stitches, you got Stitches. The new version of the zone is almost as good as the old version. They just cut out a lot of stuff. Like also, missing diplomat quest takes you back to Duskwood in Classic. Unbelievable quests. Best questing zone. It's the best questing zone. It's just the best questing zone. That's all there is to it. So check it out, man. If you've never been to Duskwood, if you've never played Alliance, this is the one. This is the zone. Okay. Next up, we have one of these. Oh man, I just don't. I go, oh man. You know what, dude? I can't decide. I'm gonna go ahead and say Feral. Feralist, unbelievable zone. Dire Maul, favorite dungeon in the game. Blackrock Depths also really good, but Feralist has an amazing aesthetic, dude. Green dragons, love it. Nightmare, Emerald Dream, all this stuff, love it. Druid, not really my main, never has been, but love the aesthetic. Feels like a night elf zone, feels like a heavy. I love the hordes influence in the zone too. Feels really good in Classic. Most important, dude, Fairless is the first real zone in Classic, if you ask me, dude. This is the zone that when you finally enter, you feel like you're playing World of Warcraft. There's tons of quests. good kill rates, good drop rates. It's like actually like where classic stopped being shit. You know what I mean? And this is where you start, like you'll be almost level 40, or you will be level 40. So you'll have your mount, you have your core talents in classic. It's like a foundational time in classic, the leveling experience. Once you get to Feralist, you know you made it. And if you watched, I did a classic leveling playthrough recently. It's on the channel. You can check it out. I spent a lot of time in Feralist. I spent like 5 episodes in Feralist. There's some really cool quests back in the day. There's some really cool quests in the modern version. The modern version's lost a lot of its charm, but there's still like the world boss, the anniversary bosses, the green dragon thing. That's still in there. There's still the green dragon whelps, which I did a part of the leveling, the leatherworking leveling challenge I did takes place there. It's really cool. Yeah, the leatherworking max level content in classic takes place in Feralist. It's just such an important zone. It feels like it's the first end game zone, like the first real end zone, a zone that you're going to spend a lot of time in. And Dire Maul. I mean, Dire Maul, easily one of the coolest locations in WoW. Night Elf mages, basically. It's like, I love it. I just absolutely love it. If I could set my hearth to Dire Maul, I would. Love that zone. I constantly fly back over Dire Maul all the time. Questing nowadays, it's good, not great, but definitely worth checking out just for the aesthetic. Now this list is, this is getting tough now. I think at this point it's going to be between Jade Forest and Ardenweald. And that's a really tough decision for me. I'm going to go ahead and just say Jade Forest, okay? Jade Forest is the best zone they've ever made. That's a strong statement, right? Very, very strong statement I'm making. And the reason I'm saying that is because it's a starting zone to an expansion that is outstanding and demands an amazing feel. So different from every other expansion up until that point. Mob's starting experience through Jade Forest is unmistakable. You will never forget your first playthrough of Jade Forest. The zone is so well crafted. It's like Revendreth. You ever go through Revendreth on the ground? It's so many paths and so many ups and downs, right? That's Jade Forest, dude. 15 years ago, they made a zone that's like that. But everybody wanted flying. So the second flying comes out, nobody cares again. Go through Jade Forest, look at the paths. Go by Jade Temple. Look at the paths around Jade Temple. There's these floating islands with giant structures on them. There's the amazing, I love the dailies, the Cloud Serpent riding dailies, dude. So much good flavor in Jade Forest, dude. It is Pandaria at its best, okay? And Pandaria is very good, if you ask me. Love it. Love what happens in the zone. The story that unfolds in the zone is unbelievable. Only regret is that they destroy the statue in front of the temple. Every time I have to fly by that, it's sad to me. But one of the prettiest zones, the first real expansion with amazing skyboxes. The music is top tier, dude. The ambience of Jade Forest, unbeatable. All these years later, it's a zone that I could, and if you go there now with Chromie time, you can get a ton of levels because all the max level content in Jade Forest is now part of the questing experience. And so there's all the dailies for the Cloud Serpent, which is deep. Like this is dozens and dozens of hours of gameplay even now. And then there's the Golden Lotus dailies or the August Celestial dailies. So one every 4 days there'll be the Temple of Jade Serpent will have dailies. So if you can catch it on that day, you can do a ton in Jade Force. So check it out. Always a little nostalgia for me, but it's always going to be one of my favorite zones ever. So next up, as we said, Ardenweald. Okay, Ardenweald is in the top 5 for sure for me, and it's just because of the music and the ambience. That's it. The questing is not good, honestly, compared to Bastion. It's not. Um, Honestly, I don't even enjoy questing in Ardenweald. I really hate to say that. I did enjoy the Night Fae campaign, but the Night Fae aesthetic, Soul Shape, the Treehouse, the sounds. Dude, every time I go back to Ardenweald, oh, it's the best music in the game. It is the best music in the game, and it's modern. It feels modern. You know, it looked modern. The blues, the trees. I mean, it was my background for years, dude. Before Shadowlands came out and after Shadowlands ended, my background was Ardenweald. Okay, it's my favorite zone in any modern version of WoW, but the questing is not great. So top 5 is a very good spot for the zone. And like I said, if Jade Forest was more modern and more developed, it would easily beat out Ardenweald, but Ardenweald is just so well developed, so much music and ambience. If you've never been to Ardenweald, and you've never heard the song that plays there so frequently, go check it out, dude. I know people don't like Shadowlands. It's for the gameplay. People dislike the Shadowlands gameplay, whatever. But the artistry that was put into this expansion is freaking unbelievable, dude. Okay, next up, the top three are very easy for me. Suramar has to be number 4. Suramar, one of the best zones ever. Again, artistry, pure artistry. The music is very interesting. It's very, you'll hear it in your head for years. That this music, every time you go to Quarter Stars, every time you drive through the zone, you're going to hear the same sounds, and it's really cool. Love the concept. One of the best max level zones, definitely the best max level zone they've ever made. And there's a lot of content in this zone. A lot. Like, this is what all max level zones should aspire to be. Such a shame. I have to say, such a shame. The Dragonflight, max level zones that they add, it reminds you what it could have been, dude. People don't want this anymore in the game, where this is like a crucial part to the gameplay. You have to spend tons and tons of time here. But, I think people look past that for Stormar because it was so freaking good. Even though there was so much tied to it and so much mandatory about it, still is. If you want to unlock Nightborn, dude, you're spending a lot of time in this zone. But it doesn't matter, dude. It's so freaking good. Coolest city. You could set your hearth here as a Nightborn. You can set your hearth to the raid. I mean, there's one of the best raids ever in the zone. What more do you need, dude? If you've never done Suramar, go do it. You could even do it in Chromie time now, because you can get 10 levels there. Or maybe it's even more than 10. But yeah, you can get a lot of levels there now. Now, it's not very good for questing in the modern day. It's more about the questing and getting the unlocks. But I have a whole playlist where I go through every story chapter of the zone. That's a big task. I'll tell you that. It's all there from the End of Legion. So top 3 are super easy. They're all basically tied. But if you see behind me, I got 2 posters. So what is surprise? The top 2 here. Well, it doesn't even matter. These 2 are literally tied. We're just going to go ahead Dunmoreau. They're tied. A complete tie here. I'm putting both of them on the list right now. It doesn't even matter the order. They're tied. Okay, Dunmoreau, same thing we talked about with Winter Spring. Amazing aesthetic. Love the snow. Love the Christmas feel. But I'll tell you right now, dude, this is the zone I started the game. When I launched WoW, the first main I ever had was Blackhammer, a dwarf warrior. Okay, I have a whole video on that. The game started in Dunmoreau. Love the winter feel. I always loved Christmas, obviously. So it's got like a really good starting base for me. But then I saw the dwarves, dude. I freaking love the dwarf culture in World of Warcraft, especially in Classic, but it's still present in Live WoW too. It's like they're in this state of hardship. They live in a frozen tundra. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing there, hardly any resources for them, but they're thriving. They're thriving, and they're joyous, and they're having a blast, dude. And I'll tell you right now, it's all nostalgia. But when you walk into, I'm gonna cry, dude. When you walk into that inn for the first time, and you hear that music, it's fucking good, man. It's amazing. And the dwarven feel in that inn. Anyway, Mulgore, just as good. Mulgore is, if it was lower on the list, almost ironically, I did put it slightly lower on the list. It would be because I never played Horde until I was an adult, like until a couple years ago on private servers. I've told that story a lot. And Mulgore is the first place I started because I wanted to be a Tauren shaman or Tauren druid. I wanted to be a druid on Horde, so I leveled a Tauren. And I'll tell you what, the zone has an amazing skybox. I've completely fallen in love with the zone. It's like another zone where I could see myself living. And now the music and ambience of it in Cataclysm and onward is unbelievable. It is without question my favorite song that isn't the Ardenweald song. Number 2 on the list is this Tauren song that plays. It was added in Cataclysm. I thought it was added in Classic. It was not. I played through a whole Tauren playthrough on Classic and never heard the song once. Found out it was in Cataclysm. Night Skybox in Mulgore, unbelievable. Questing there a little funky. You can go there as like a troll and stuff, but probably 1/3 of the quests in the game require you to beat a Tauren, which is really strange. I think it's probably some kind of vestigial structure from Classic where they had these items that were only for Tauren. I don't know why they did any of this, but if you look through the files, you can see that they're only equipable by Tauren, only usable by Tauren. I don't understand that, but it does kind of ruin a part of the zone to me because I would love to go there on every Horde character I have, but you can still. I actually started a playthrough of a Mulgore only run, which is perfectly possible with Chromie time and Party Sync. But I didn't finish it. It was going to take hours and hours and hours. But anyway, it's a great zone. Definitely the best Horde starting zone without question. Just like Dunmurrow is the best Alliance starting zone. And I have a whole different level of love for it now because I didn't come to it until I was in my late 20s. You know what I mean? Whereas Dunmurrow, I'm sitting here crying about because it reminds me of when I was, a young kid. So, um, but both of these zones neck and neck. There's a reason for the posters. You know what I mean? And then the Barrens is easily number one. If you've watched this channel at all, you ever heard me talk about zones, the Barrens is an absolutely, it's the best zone in the game. And again, it's only the Northern Barrens, but it's both. I'm talking about both. Classic Barrens is the best zone. It's. I don't even feel like I need to explain it. It's just the best zone. It has so much cool shit. It's basically like it's like the hub for Horde, dude. I just had this happen to me the other night. I was in somewhere in Dragonflight. I died in this weird way, and the game can't figure out where you are, so it sends you to the Barrens. It was like divine providence. I was like, oh, I'm back in the Barrens. You know what I mean? It's like where the Horde goes. Okay, every Horde character has to go through the Barrens. You cannot level a Horde character without being in the Barrens. Barrens chat legendary. Biggest zone ever. You get like you start at level 10 and you'll be 26 by like 20 something by the time you leave the zone. Fucking giant zone. Camp Tarajo, tons of stuff down south. Content that keeps giving. You come back to the Barrens. The Silithid questline through Horde takes you from the Barrens elsewhere, back to the Barrens, back here. Unbelievable. Sends you to Orgrimmar, sends you to Thunderbluff. Tons of vendors, tons of cool stuff, tons of flavor. It is the Warcraft 3. You know what I mean? Like it comes right out of Warcraft 3. And that is the Horde. Horde personified, dude. Horde personified. When I switched to Horde, I never leveled. But when they split the Barrens, it split part of my love for the game because the zone is so good. And the Southern Barrens now, like the version that we have, the Northern Barrens is basically exactly what you want from the Barrens. The Southern Barrens is a whole different zone, but it's good, man. There's a lot of cool stuff in it, and I would say it's definitely like top 10 zones for me. The Mancrick stuff at the end of the Southern Barrens, unbelievable, dude. Unbelievable. Really cool storyline. Carried on into the Orc Heritage armor, apparently. So, haven't done it, but yeah, really, really good. I would say the Baron's pretty clear. So, long ass video. If anybody watched the entire hour and some minutes, let me know. You're a badass. I just wanted to get this video out. Really excited for season 2 Shadow or Dragonflight, but this is a topic near and dear to my heart. So let me know what your top 5 are. You want to do top 25, whatever you want to do. Post them down below. Give them the low reasons. I'd love to have a conversation about this. But thank you for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.